Slide 1. Stress and cortisol. Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture on stress and cortisol. My name is Nadeem, and I'll be guiding you through the intricate relationship between stress, cortisol, and their impact on our bodies. This lecture will cover the basics of cortisol, its biosynthesis, and its effects on various physiological processes. Let's start by understanding the adrenal cortex. The adrenal glands, located atop each kidney, are crucial endocrine organs. Each gland has two main regions, the outer adrenal cortex and the inner adrenal medulla. The cortex, making up the majority of the gland, is further divided into three zones, each with distinct functions. These three zones are the zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. The zona glomerulosa produces mineralocorticoids like aldosterone, regulating sodium and potassium balance. The zona fasciculata produces glucocorticoids, mainly cortisol, vital for glucose metabolism and stress adaptation. Finally, the zona reticularis produces androgens, playing a role in secondary sexual characteristics. Now let's delve into cortisol biosynthesis. Exposure to stresses triggers the hypothalamus to release corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH. CRH then stimulates the anterior pituitary gland to secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. ACTH binds to receptors on the adrenal gland, activating a cascade that ultimately leads to the production of cortisol. Cortisol is secreted by the zona fasciculata and zona reticularis layers of the adrenal cortex. This hormone is a 21-carbon steroid synthesized from acetyl-CoA and cholesterol. The biologically active form of cortisol can be converted to an inactive form known as cortisone by the enzyme 11B, hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, LUL11B, HSD1. Let's look at some key characteristics of cortisol. The daily secretion rate is about 15 milligrams per day, with a half-life of 100 minutes. In plasma, 94% is bound to cortisol-binding proteins, leaving only 6% in the free active form. This binding to proteins like cortisol-binding globulin, transcortin, extends its half-life. Cortisol levels fluctuate throughout the day, rising in the early morning and declining in the evening. This diurnal rhythm is crucial for maintaining homeostasis and allostasis, especially during stress. However, both increased and decreased levels of cortisol can lead to pathological conditions. A flattening of this cortisol rhythm is often observed in the elderly, particularly those with chronic diseases like Alzheimer's. This disruption can have significant implications for their overall health and well-being. Elevated cortisol levels, often triggered by chronic stresses, can lead to a state of constant alertness and exhaustion. Individuals may feel constantly behind schedule, easily irritated, and lacking enthusiasm. High cortisol levels in the evening can disrupt sleep patterns and increase anxiety. Individuals might find it difficult to fall asleep, feel worried, or engage in argumentative behavior late at night. Conversely, prolonged stress can lead to adrenal exhaustion and low cortisol levels. This can manifest as persistent fatigue, reliance on stimulants, and a tendency to fall asleep easily. Cortisol exerts its effects by binding to glucocorticoid receptors, GRs, which are members of the nuclear receptor family. These receptors are found in nearly all nucleated cells and have distinct domains for transactivation, DNA binding, and ligand binding. Alternative splicing of the GR gene results in two isoforms, GRA and GRB. In its inactive state, the GR resides in the cytoplasm bound to chaperone proteins. When cortisol binds, the receptor undergoes a conformational change, dissociates from the chaperones, and translocates to the nucleus. Once in the nucleus, the GR can regulate gene transcription in various ways. It can bind directly to glucocorticoid response elements, GREs, as a dimer, or it can interact with other transcription factors. Additionally, it can repress gene expression through various mechanisms. Glucocorticoids are widely used in clinical practice due to their immunosuppressive, anti-inflammatory, and anti-allergic effects. They are effective in treating conditions like asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, and inflammatory bowel diseases. However, long-term exposure to high cortisol levels can lead to a cluster of metabolic abnormalities, including hyperglycemia, abdominal obesity, dyslipidemia, and hypertension. This is because glucocorticoids can induce insulin resistance. Insulin resistance occurs when a higher dose of insulin is required to produce the same effect on glucose storage. This leads to decreased glucose uptake by the liver, muscles, and adipose tissues, ultimately resulting in hyperglycemia and type 2 diabetes. Adipose tissue, or fat tissue, plays a crucial role in glucose homeostasis. It stores energy in the form of triglycerides and releases fatty acids and glycerol. Both white and brown fat cells are sensitive to insulin. Glucocorticoids activated by the enzyme 11B, HSD1, bind to GRs in adipocytes. This leads to increased lipolysis, decreased glucose uptake, and insulin resistance. In the liver, insulin normally stimulates glucose utilization and storage. However, glucocorticoids promote hepatic glucose production by stimulating gluconeogenesis. Glucocorticoids binding to GRs in hepatocytes leads to glucose production through upregulation of neoglucogenesis. This process also leads to lipid export and insulin resistance. Skeletal muscles are responsible for most of insulin-stimulated glucose uptake and storage. Glucocorticoids, however, can induce muscle atrophy and weaken skeletal muscles, making them potent insulin antagonists. Glucocorticoid exposure decreases glucose uptake in skeletal muscles by inhibiting GLUT4 translocation. They also reduce glycogen synthesis and interact directly with insulin signaling pathways. Glucocorticoids bind to GRs, leading to protein catabolism and amino acid release. Glycogen synthesis is reduced, and insulin resistance is induced through various mechanisms. Glucocorticoids can also negatively impact bone health. They inhibit osteoblast proliferation and induce apoptosis of osteoblasts, while positively influencing the proliferation of osteoclasts. Addison's disease, also known as adrenal insufficiency, is a rare disorder characterized by the insufficient production of cortisol and aldosterone. It occurs when more than 90% of the adrenal cortex is destroyed. Slide 27. Addison's disease is primarily caused by autoimmune destruction of the adrenal cortex. Other causes include surgical removal of the adrenal glands, tuberculosis, fungal infections, and sudden cessation of long-term glucocorticoid use. Cushing's syndrome is a hormonal disorder caused by prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol. It can result from excessive ACTH production by the pituitary gland. Cushing's syndrome manifests in various ways, including weight gain, a buffalo hump, a rounded face, thin skin with stretch marks, and muscle wastage. Cushing's syndrome can also lead to hypertension, hyponatremia, hypokalemia, virilism in women, and mental disturbances. Thank you for your attention. I hope this lecture has provided you with a comprehensive understanding of stress, cortisol, and their impact on the body.